Mayor Allen, it is 5 o'clock. You may start the meeting when you're ready. Oh, Mayor Allen, we're not able to hear you. It looks like you are unmuted, but we're not able to hear anything.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go out and come back in.
It's working now.
Okay. Good. Overused today. Okay, can I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Moore, with the special meeting of the Council of Township of Springwater of May 19, 2021 come to order at 5:01 p.m. All those in favor? It's carried. Due to COVID, council is holding Zoom meetings virtually, so council and staff are participating electronically. This is being live streamed. You can access it by going to the township website, www.springwater.ca. You can listen to it by phone by calling 647-558-0588 and using the ID 831-2978-1547 and the pound sign during the meeting. And if you're unable to do this and want to see the live stream, you can access that on the township's YouTube channel via the website. Council, good afternoon. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? All right, seeing none, I'll now call upon Dr. Michael Powell and Dr. William Shattuck of the University of Alberta to provide council with a presentation on understanding the groundwaters of Huronia, an integrated scientific approach with policy and societal impacts. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Mike, shall I start?
Sorry.
Mike has been having internet connection issues.
We could hear him there. We can see him.
Murphy's Law.
We can
Everybody
see you.
hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
we
we can hear you, Mike.
When we were testing earlier, he was unable to hear us, unfortunately.
Looks like that's the same problem now. Yeah, he can't hear us.
I'm getting a word now and again. Bill, say something.
I will say that I'm sorry that you're having problems with your internet connection.
Well, you don't have to hear us. We have to hear you. So go ahead and make your presentation, Mr. Powell.
Oh, do you want me to go first? Or do you
Please.
want to go, Billy? Or
Well, Mike, maybe I will start because I'm going to be speaking about the water quality, and Mike is going to be talking about the geology of the area and the project. So if it's okay with everybody, I will start. Am I now able to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Okay, we can see that.
Can everybody see that? That's great. And everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
So first, I thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for taking the time and for providing us with this opportunity. It's sincerely appreciated. I know we're living in very difficult times at the moment. I hope everybody is doing well and managing okay. And again, thank you for this opportunity. So I'm going to be speaking for approximately 15 minutes, and my focus is water quality. So the title of the presentation, Understanding the Groundwaters of Huronia, an Integrated Scientific Approach with Policy and Societal Impacts. And so the outline is here. Just a quick word about the flowing artesian springs of the area. I think this is something that you're very familiar with anyway, being in Springwater Township. I want to recognize the first Indigenous inhabitants, and my focus will be on the quality of the groundwater. I'll say a few words about the age of the water, and then some perspectives on why this water may be so clean. And then some technological developments in the swamp laboratory at the University of Alberta that are relevant to this, this groundwater project. So
Before you get
first,
started,
Yep.
do you go by William or Bill?
oh, Bill,
Bill, yeah, it just says William on your screen there. So if there are questions, are we able to, through flashing cards, have me direct them to you throughout the presentation?
absolutely no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. So these artesian springs of the area, again, these are very familiar to you. You live in Springwater Township. Whoever came up with that name, Springwater Township, I think that was a brilliant idea. These are some of the artesian flows that I've tested over the years. I do want to recognize the first Indigenous inhabitants of the area, the Wendat people. This is a part of an old map of the areas from 1898. And I've circled the village of Elmvale here. And I want to draw your attention to this Wendat village. And I'm sure I won't be able to pronounce the name correctly, Ekiondestsan. The point here is the name of the village means the lands which exude water. So these artesian springs that are so familiar to you, these were also important to Indigenous inhabitants, and people have been drinking this water for centuries or for millennia. So this water has been a vital resource to the area for a long, long time. So quality of the groundwater, I'll start by talking about nutrients, and specifically nitrate and phosphate. And this is the artesian flow on our family farm property, which is just a little bit north of Elmvale. CBC radio indicated that it's in Tiny Township. It's not. It's in Springwater Township. We haven't moved the farm. It's still in Springwater Township. And I've been testing this water for on and off for a little bit over 30 years. And all of my measurements of this water show that nitrate and phosphate are below the limits of detection. And these are the most common parameters that are used as indicators of water quality. So I've known for many, many years that this water is very, very, very clean. Another indicator of groundwater quality is chloride. And so the chloride in this water at the farm is less than 1 milligram per liter. That's less than 1 part per million of chloride. And I want you to remember that number, 1 part per million. We have data now for this water from the farm going back in time approximately 30 years. Okay, so for the past 30 years, and this is data from 5 different laboratories. So my laboratory in Switzerland, my laboratory in Germany, the University of Ottawa, my lab at University of Alberta, at the Ontario Geological Survey, chloride is below, at or below 1 milligram per liter, 1 part per million. And I'll explain why that number is so significant. John Cherry is one of the world's leading authorities on groundwater. And his definition of pristine groundwater is groundwater that has less than 5 milligrams per liter. And he is certainly the authority. He's written the most famous textbook on groundwater. When I first met him and I told him that our water has less than 1 milligram per liter, he said, Bill, that's impossible. There is no groundwater that's so clean. And then I shared with him our data from the past 30 years. He said that he's never before seen such a clean groundwater anywhere. Right? Those are his words. Another way to look at groundwater quality is to look at organic contaminants. And you know that agriculture is a very important part of the economy. And you know that farmers use all kinds of pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, and so on. Despite our efforts, we have not been able to determine any organic contaminants in these waters. So this is one of the wells that I set up for doing my research at a depth of 13 meters. This is the Parnell flow at a depth of 8.5 meters. And this is, it's an old photo, but this is the artesian flow on County Road 27, just north of Elmvale. And that's a depth of 56 meters. So I sampled all of these waters to measure organic contaminants, and specifically hydrocarbons and pesticides. And all of this work was done by a colleague, Daniel Bersay, in Switzerland. He's a specialist for organic contaminants in groundwater. These are special glass bottles, cleaned and degreased and baked. And he shipped me all the bottles. I shipped him back all the waters. And he was not able to measure anything in these waters. He was not able to detect anything. He said that he's never before seen such clean groundwater. When we put in a new research well on my farm property, this is called Ego 3. It's 60 meters deep. That was installed in May of 2012. We collected that water again to measure organic contaminants. And that was all done in Alberta. And a scan was done for 75 pesticides in that groundwater. And this work was done by Alberto Pereira from Inotech, Alberta. All 75 were below the limit of detection. Okay, so the message here is that this is not just clean water, but this water is exceptional water. Trace elements. This is my area of research. So for me to do my research, I've had to design and build and install dedicated groundwater sampling wells. And they sit in this little cabin. Some of you have visited this facility. I call it the Elmvale Groundwater Observatory. And by the way, this is the water that I use as a reference water for all my work in Alberta on the Athabasca River. But this water is so clean. Not only do we have dedicated wells, but we filter the air before we collect our samples. So this is the only facility that I know of where groundwater is sampled in a clean air cabinet. Those cabinets have special air filters to remove all the dust particles in the air, because ambient air can affect my results. So ice cores from the Arctic of Canada that we've also analyzed at my lab when I was in Heidelberg in Germany, the cleanest ice layers that are thousands of years old, on average have 5 nanograms per liter or parts per trillion of lead. So the cleanest layers of ancient Arctic ice, 5 parts per trillion of lead. This groundwater, 1 part per trillion of lead. So this groundwater is cleaner than ancient Arctic ice. How small is a part per trillion? That's like taking 1 liter and adding it to Lake Huron. That's a very, very tiny number. So again, the quality of this water is truly exceptional. And I will mention that our work has been called out by the international scientific community. We're one of the very first labs able to measure lead in groundwater because the levels are so low. Most labs, almost all of the other labs, cannot measure lead at these concentrations. How old is this water? Fascinating question. If we look at the Parnell flow, this is what's called modern water. And we know that from measuring tritium, which is a measure of environmental radioactivity related to nuclear weapons testing. This tells us the presence of this, which has no significance for human health, the presence of this radioactivity tells us the water is younger than 1950. It's young water. Some of this water is young. However, the water is still exceptionally pure. The water is young and exceptionally pure, okay, at this flow. And at my farm property, where I have the Elmville Groundwater Observatory, during the past 15 years, we have not been able to measure any tritium. So the water at the Elmville Groundwater Observatory is older than 1950. So the question is, how much older? Well, Ian Clark, professor at the University of Ottawa, is an expert on dating the groundwater, okay? And he's been analyzing the water from my farm using radiocarbon, using iodine 129. It looks like this water gushing out of the ground at our farm is 3,000 years old. So that water that I'm using for my research to study trace elements is ancient groundwater. So some of the water is young, some of the water is old. Now, why is this groundwater so clean? I think the answer is very simple. The water is being filtered by soil. So the water comes to us from the hills to the east, and in those hills, the water is being filtered. So Mother Nature has this amazing material called soil, and soil is doing the water filtration, and soil is removing the contaminants that are supplied by rainwater. So my research objectives for this project, first of all, to determine the quality of the groundwater from these springs, and then to understand the processes that generate water of this quality. And so I literally want to look at trace elements in the air and trace elements in the groundwater. So I want to look at the evolution of the water in these artesian flow systems, starting with atmospheric water and following its path as it migrates through the soil. And I want to point out a number of technological developments that we've made in the swamp lab that can be used for the groundwater study. And I'll mention them just very briefly. So the swamp lab is my lab at the University of Alberta. And we've developed methods for sampling atmospheric water, snow and rain, bulk atmospheric deposition using moss and peat. We've developed ways to fractionate trace elements in soil to understand behavior, to sample the water that's in the soil to understand migration, and to look at the species of trace elements that are in the soil water. And then, of course, how to sample and analyze the water from the Elmville Groundwater Observatory. And all of this is done in Alberta in a metal-free laboratory. So we've developed ways of looking at trace elements in moss and snow, and this gives us a record of atmospheric inputs. And we've also developed a special rain collector, which is automated and is made of plastic, and we'll use this to collect rainwater for trace elements. And this was designed and built by our engineering mechanic, Tommy Nurnberg, who's a kind of mechanical genius and can build anything. We've also using peat cores from peat bogs to reconstruct the history of atmospheric metal deposition. So we can go back in time, decades, centuries, millennia, to monitor air quality going back in history. And there is a little peat bog near the farm in Tiny Township, and we've been there to collect a peat core. So we're doing an environmental reconstruction there. We're also understanding how soil filters the water by fractionating the soil and determining which fractions of the soil contain trace elements, the reactive fractions, the organic fractions, the insoluble fractions, and so on. And we've also developed a technique to extract the water from the soil. And this is a stainless steel lysimeter that Tommy has designed and built. So we literally remove the water from the soil, and we can do that at any depth to see at what depth this filtration is taking place. And we've developed a technique in the lab to measure trace elements as a function of molecular size. So we can measure trace elements down to particles as small as 1 nanometer. So we can determine what's actually dissolved in the water, in the soil, and what's present in the form of nanoparticles. And all of this work is done in this metal-free, ultra-clean laboratory. The whole lab is built of plastic. The air is filtered, clean water, clean acid, clean air, so that we can measure to very, very low levels. And by the way, this lab is absolutely essential for measuring trace elements in that Elmvale water because it's so clean. So all of the technology that I just mentioned is already available. We've developed all of these things in Alberta, and it's all ready to apply to the swamp, to the groundwater study. And all of these people have helped with all of these aspects of the work. Final word, the epilogue for my presentation, just a word about the passenger pigeon. This was the most abundant bird on the planet, the most abundant bird on the planet. In 1857, there was a discussion in the Senate of Ohio about a bill to protect the passenger pigeon. But they decided that the passenger pigeon does not need protection because it's so abundant. The last one of its species died in 1914. So this is the logo of the Elmvale Water Festival, and that's the logo of the Elmville Foundation. More information is found at elmvale.org. The Elmville Foundation is doing everything it can to educate the public about the quality of this water and the importance of protecting this water for future generations.
Bill, I have a question. What
Sure.
what led to the extinction of the passenger pigeon when there were as many as 3 to 5 billion of them?
Hunting.
Okay.
They were literally hunted to extinction, which is hard to imagine. So Mayor Allen, when I read about the passenger pigeon, when they were migrating, they would darken the skies for days at a time. It's when they would land in some big old trees, the trees would collapse from their weight. And, the very famous French-Canadian tourtière was made originally with the meat from the passenger pigeon.
Okay. Councillor Cabral has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Actually, just to thank Dr. Shattuck for coming out, Mr. Powell, but also for thanking him, because I know we did do a tour of his farm and the water laboratory there. But I wanted to know, Dr. Shattuck, if you might be able to provide some insight as to just how far this aquifer reaches and who is drawing water from the aquifer as far as well water, whether it's in town in Elmvale or somewhere else in Springwater Township or whatever community, we're all drawing it from wells. So could you give us some idea of just how far the aquifer reaches and what kind of impact the degradation of the water would have?
So, Councillor Cabral, thank you very much for this question. I can't answer that question. And I think the question is very, very important. And that's why we want to do this groundwater study. And so, Councillor Cabral, as you know, I am just a soil scientist. I am not a hydrogeologist, but the experts, John Cherry, Ian Clark, having brought them to this area, I brought them to the Elmvale water kiosk at the side of the road. The water is gushing out of the ground. And they both looked at this and they said, Bill, we do not understand this at all. How do you have so much water? Where is this water coming from? Why is some of it so old? So my answer to you is the experts don't know. The experts don't know. And here is the message, and I don't know how else to say this. We need to understand this water so that we can answer questions like yours, and so that we can really understand what impacts land use changes in the area may have on this water, right? So I cannot overemphasize, again, it's not great water or excellent water. It is spectacular, unique water. And so we need to understand that the size of the aquifer, the rates of the water flow, where that water is coming from, that's all part of the design of this groundwater study. And Mike Powell, who's been in the field looking at the geology of the area, Mike is a real geologist. I've been learning geology from him. It's the geology of the area that dictates the architecture of those aquifers. So we need to better understand the geology to better understand the hydrology to be able to answer your question.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're moving on to that then with Mr. Powell. You're muted, Mr. Powell. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Unusual for me to be muted.
Mm-hmm.
I trust everyone can see that screen.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I don't know why this happens all the time. I'll just simply
There we go.
start back at the beginning here, guys. I will do this quickly because, except it's not letting me go to, there we go. I will do this quickly because I think it's important to leave time for conversations. But to Councillor Cabral, I hope I can answer a little bit some of the questions you asked. I want to discuss two things today. One is the complexity of the study that we are proposing, and the other is the partnership and the role of all of the townships of Simcoe County, but in particular today talking about Springwater. And the title of this project more or less encapsulates some of the idea of complexity, understanding the quality of the groundwaters of Huronia. It's an integrated scientific approach with policy and societal implications. And I really need to emphasize this. By integrated, we mean that specialists from three very different aspects of water science are going to be involved in this project. all of their work will complement each other. And finally, we're not just thinking about, like most scientists do, publishing a paper in a journal and putting it in a library. What we're interested in is policy changes and societal impacts. And that's where the partnership with the township comes in. Just a real quick lesson on something, only because I'm going to be talking about it and I don't want any confusion. And that is what we talk about when we talk about springs and aquifers and et cetera, et cetera. Imagine here we have the Simcoe uplands, and in the Simcoe uplands, the water falls on the ground. Where it falls determines where it goes. Water that flows above what are called aquitards or confining beds sits in the water table. You see it here. And when it intersects the surface of the earth, it becomes a spring or a stream. I've noticed from my work in Simcoe County that a lot of people call all of the water that flows on the surface artesian, and I don't believe it is. And this is very important to the discussion about the extent that Councillor Cabral was talking about, the extent of the water and the land use change. Water that infiltrates here and that goes underneath these confining beds or aquitards is under pressure for the most part. And that is the water that when you dig a well or bore a well down into it, it rises to the surface and gushes out of the ground, or doesn't. But in most cases in Simcoe County, it does. So we have springs and seeps that sit on the ground that come from this unconfined standard water table. And then we have artesian flows that come from these pressurized aquifers that sit below the surface. And those two waters have probably very different origins and very different characteristics when we start talking about land use change in Simcoe County. All of you know that where you're sitting right now at one point in time was covered by the Laurentide ice sheet, approximately 2 kilometers of ice where you're sitting. We thank the people at the Ontario Geological Survey for giving us this information. We see a topographic or a relief map here of the area that you guys are in, the red circle being Simcoe County or thereabouts. And what happened when these glaciers came through this area is they gouged these deep valleys, what we call the Laurentian Valley that sits right here. And you can see this cross section in the bottom. The cross section of the base of these valleys is undulating. It's shallow in some areas and very deep in others. But the bottom line, when these glaciers left, they filled these valleys up with sediments. And people like the geologists at the Geological Survey have come along and they've gone to the uplands of Simcoe and they've gone to the clay plains of Simcoe and they've drilled all the way down to bedrock and they've put together a very complicated stratigraphy of all of the sediments that we see there. For our discussions today, all we really care about right now is those parts of those columns that will transmit water and those that don't. So aquitards, those areas that do not transmit water, found mainly on the surface throughout the clay plain. Aquifers found below them with water under pressure, but aquifers also found at various depths throughout the entire core. And I will say quite seriously that nobody at this point in time understands the relationship or the complexity of all of those different layers when it comes to groundwater. The OGS has bored a lot of holes in the ground. And what this really looks like when you look at it is this, in this upper part of the diagram, aquifers are this very well sorted from fine to coarse material that comes in pockets and layers and lenses. Aquitards are these unsorted areas that are thick in some places, pinch out in other places, or are fairly consistent throughout. Any of you that have gone in your backyard or have a farm or have gone to different places in Simcoe County and dug a hole in the ground know that you find a tremendously different material. And this is important because that material not only is important in transmitting or not transmitting groundwater, but it's also very important for recharge. Where does all this groundwater come from? How does it get in the ground? And there is no consistency as you go across this valley. It's extremely variable. And it's so variable. Here's a cartoon. It's an actual section of a geologic a glacial valley filled with geologic sediments. And if you put a hole down here, you'll see this geology. If you put a hole down here, you'll see this geology. Trying to correlate across these areas with only a few holes is extremely difficult because the very, very rapid change, both vertically and laterally, as you go through these areas. We just don't have enough holes in the ground yet to do that. In the area of French's Hill, which is probably the most famous of the Simcoe uplands in the county, located here, as you can see, this is Simcoe County, just as a location for you. Elmvale is just off the map here. Here's Tiny Marsh. You go from a high of about 310 meters down to the clay plain. When you do that, when you come off the side of the hill, you go across this area that's wet. It's forested, it's full of seeps, it's full of water. You then go out into the clay plain. There is, and we've identified it in the field, you can see it here in these pictures, and I have traced it along the bed of the Wye River for tens of kilometers away from this hill. There is a very significant clay layer. Imagine this from the cartoon I showed earlier. Water falls on the surface of the ground. Some of it goes into the regular water table. Some of it goes below this clay bed, becomes trapped and goes under pressure. All of this water flows out into the valley. These wells or seeps or springs that you find here are natural. They're not under pressure. And the materials here, the water that comes up here when you punch a hole through this clay, is the water that's under pressure. What does that mean? Well, here's a topographic map, just very quickly. Topographic, I'm not sure if your pictures are, sorry, folks. A little diagram here to show you how contour lines work. Contour lines on a map, a contour map, when they're close together, they represent very steep slopes. When they're very far apart, they represent very gentle slopes. So here we come off of French's Hill, and you can see here I've circled the contour intervals, which is 10 meters in this place, very steep. This is going to the northwest. You see the Wye River here and its headland streams in this area. And the funny thing is, here's the 250-foot contour line coming right around here like this. And you don't see the beginning of any little streams or rivulets. You don't see any wetlands like you see here until you hit that elevation. The water is not artesian here. It's simply naturally coming out of the ground because that water table we talked about has intersected the surface. And if you look at the farthest ends, all of these little blue X's that are all feeder streams for the Wye River, you see they all occur up here and very close to this 250-meter level. That clay bed that I showed you exists here. This is where I visited in this part of the watershed, but you can walk down the Wye and that clay stays with you for a long, long, long way. You then see other rivulets that start popping out of the ground that are underneath this clay. And I would say that these are waters that are more under pressure. What that means effectively for all of us is that you can't say that a well here and a well there and a well somewhere else are necessarily the same groundwater or connected in the same way. There are lots of wells that you have to pump or that flow to the surface that are not artesian in the areas closest to French's Hill. There are artesian flows just slightly out from that, and there's a line of them that circles French's Hill and it circles the Simcoe Highlands to the southeast of Elmvale. This is where the water's under greatest pressure. And when you get out into the clay plain, we know that if you're drilling a well, you might go 13, 15 meters, you might go 30 meters, you might go 60 meters, you might go all the way to bedrock before you get the quality of water that you want. Nobody knows the hydrogeology of this area well enough to be able to say they can predict everything that's going to happen because of land use change in that area. It's virtually impossible. One of the neat things about our project, going on to partnership and what we're doing here, is that we will do the natural science. We'll figure out the source and the age and the materials and the geology and the connectivity of all of this stuff for the first time, probably. We will then have partnership with folks like you guys, other townships, cottage associations, civil society groups, other universities, other government levels, Ministry of Environment, et cetera, and we will try to impact policy. We will have a value added to our data, and it will, in that way, be able to go from what we would call basic research to applied research, technology and policy, economic development, and finally impact the quality of life of the people of Canada. As a township, you have an important role to play if you want to play it. The bottom line is it's a two-way street. We will have many townships, we will have provincial governments, we will have federal governments, we hope, we will have private sector organizations, we will have civil society groups, all as bona fide partners. We're not looking for people to put their names on a list. We're looking for people who will actually become partners on the NSERC application to the Government of Canada to do the research in Simcoe County to really say why the water is the quality that it is and what will happen to it based on various types of land use change. It will be the first project to answer that question. And I don't think there's any doubt about it. The township will provide a letter of intent, and then the township will actually have to fill out an online couple-page form, which I will help your people with if you decide to join. You will get from us all of the information as it comes available. You will be involved with the planning of the project, which I think is important, because what we want to say is, for your objectives, what can we do for you to provide maybe information we hadn't thought of that will make it easier for your township to manage natural resources? That's part of partnership in providing this grant. So I'm going to quit there just because I really did want to save as much time as possible for discussion. And you can all read all of this at your own leisure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very informative. All right, open it up to questions, discussion, council. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Thank you, Bill, and the other gentleman that just spoke, Mike Powell. One question that I have is, you're saying that these are studies that have never been done. There are other outfits that have studied groundwater, Golder and Associates. That name seems to be quite familiar in my mind. I heard it come up many times when I sat for my first term with the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority a few years ago. So these are groundwater specialists that study water as well. And I'd like to hear from them what they have to say as well too. So I appreciate what you're doing. I compliment what you're doing. And yes, we have the best water in the world, but I tend to believe that there are other people out there that have information about this groundwater. So I'm a little reluctant there just to believe everything what you're saying. But again, I appreciate you coming tonight to put this presentation on.
Well, I appreciate your candor, Councillor Ritchie, and there's no answer to what you say. You're going to go out and you're going to do the research that you need to do, and that's good. We come to you as scientists who are going to do a research project in that area in a way that it has never been done before by anyone. We are going to then tie that data together and give a three-dimensional view of the hydrogeology of that area. We know that that kind of information can only be gleaned through borehole information and ground level geophysics for the most part. I've seen virtually every study that's been done, and I know that every one of those studies has drawn its own conclusions. Most of them don't agree with each other. But I can honestly say that there has not been yet the kind of borehole data gathered in that area to provide the answer to the question of why that water is the quality it is, and or what land use change might do to it.
Can you follow up and flesh out a little bit more what the project would involve in the way of timing, procedure, cost?
Sure. We and by the way, just so you know, I mean, we're asking you to be a partner in this project, and that ask allows you huge latitude. So at least we would like some in-kind contributions. That means that people's time within council or your staff, because it will be important for you to have someone liaise with us to stay up on everything that happens and to attend our meetings virtually, whatever it might be. There's a possibility of you giving money if your staff is too short and you would like to do a donation. There's not a research scientist in the world that will turn down a donation. I can guarantee you that right now. And we do have to have funds because we want to get matching money from the government of Canada. But how involved you become is entirely up to the group of people I'm looking at right now on this screen. If you want, we will prioritize our stakeholders, actors, partners, whatever word you want to use. There are at the bottom of the rung of stakeholders, there are those people that simply want to be informed. They want to get a newsletter or read a blog or see something written, and just so that they know what's going on. There is above that level, there's that group of stakeholders that has information for us that's very helpful, but they don't expect to provide any data or results. And then there's the top list of rung of actors, and those people actually produce information that goes into our reports to the Government of Canada and impact the project results. It's up to you guys to decide where you want to be. And, you know, the different townships in Simcoe will probably come up with different levels of participation. We believe that the data that we produce will allow you to make better policy regarding natural resource protection and use as far as water goes. And we believe that that policy will then impact the quality of lives of the people, not only in Simcoe County, but in Ontario and other parts of Canada, because we will identify a natural analog that has never been done before, and we'll be able to extrapolate those findings to other parts of the country.
Okay, before going to Councillor Cabral, what is the time frame of estimation of this project?
We have every 2 weeks, we have a science team meeting. And in the last couple, we've decided that September of 2021, between September and November of 2021, we will submit our application to the Government of Canada, to NSERC. So we've given ourselves a 3-month window. I hope that it's closer to September, maybe it's October 1st, but it'll be in the fall. And then with this new funding scheme that NSERC has, there really should only take about 6 weeks or so to approve or deny us. Even if that were stretched out to 2 months, that would be pretty active. And that would mean that we would get permission to start grinding the wheels right after the first of the year, maybe a little later, maybe February.
And then again, so the duration of the project would be how long?
5 years.
5 years.
And in that 5 years, we would start out in the first year with a couple of very special cored holes that would be picked, one probably in the uplands, one in the clay plain. From the information we get from those holes, We will then determine in year 2 probably where 3 more holes will go. And from that information, we will decide where another 2 to 3 will go. So maybe to a maximum of 10 holes. That's just for the geology and hydrogeology. Then people like Bill, because of what his research objectives are, will also be setting out fields of lysimeters to measure groundwaters at different depths, to look at the purity and to look at the isotopic signatures for age, to try to figure out extent of the groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a whole lot of activity.
And you've done a pro forma budget on this, have you?
Yeah, we're in the process of doing that now. It's unfortunate. I mean, budget has to be the way you look at this. The NSERC grant that we're applying for allows $1 million a year for 5 years. We will be going probably for the max unless something happens. And guys, you know this, something can happen. But we expect to go for the max. And then we may have to tailor the scope of the project a little bit. But if we tailor the scope, what we would do is shrink the size of it a bit, but still try to be able to answer the important questions about what are the processes working in that area to create what to date is considered probably the cleanest water yet analyzed on the surface of the earth.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I just wanted to say I did watch the presentation that we were invited to that you gave at Tiny. And I noted at the end of it that with respect to the boreholes that Tiny basically, and I think that us as a council, I know my drinking water is coming from there. Everybody's drinking water is coming from there. So this is a very significant and important thing. And if the water is as pristine and pure as what we've seen ourselves actually going to the water observatory, it's something really that the federal government should be stepping in and taking care of. But I would like to suggest that maybe as a starting point that Township of Springwater might be able to make at least our own township controlled property available like Tiny did for the potential of putting in your boreholes, if that would be helpful.
That is exactly the kind of thing we're looking for in the partnership range. We too believe the federal government should be involved. This is a really, really strange thing for me to say. I'm a scientist, but I get emotional about this. We're not talking about, and I have to point this out, and other people in our science team don't like this. This is not a NIMBY situation, not in my backyard. This isn't water against aggregate taking. What this is saying that there is a water here that needs to be treated differently than most waters. It is a Canadian treasure. It's known globally that this water is what it is because of Bill's work in Germany and Switzerland and his association with scientists around the world. There are a lot of people very excited about this water. We want to make sure that the natural analog that produces this water is not destroyed before we understand it. So that's the biggest thing. Having, being able to drill some wells on your township property would be a great bonus. I mean, we got to do all the legal stuff and blah, 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 but that is certainly something we would ask for. And very importantly, you'll see this in the last slide of the presentation that I sent you, is that we would appreciate your help in signing up other partners.
If I can just add here, so just following Councillor Cabral, so we would be thrilled if Springwater Township came to the table in terms of, making locations available to us. That would be a great help. So, my farm property, you've been to the Elmvale Groundwater Observatory. So it wasn't my suggestion, it was John Cherry's suggestion that, Bill, we need to put in a borehole at your farm and go all the way down to bedrock. And so I'm absolutely fine with that. But as a private landowner, of course, I have to think about, how can I say it? At some point, that research facility that will be there, making that available to society when I'm no longer around. And so And I'm happy to do that. That's not the issue, but it becomes so much easier if it's on Springwater Township property. And again, you're Springwater Township. I mean, the name says it all. So from my perspective, I'm not just saying that because I own a property in Springwater Township, but if any municipality should be involved in this project, it should be Springwater Township, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you both for the presentation. It's been a couple of years since I have heard it. The last time I did was at the Elmville Library, and at that time, the presentation, Mike, you were speaking about a grant. It was a 30,000 over 5. I don't know if it was a year or over. Did that ever come to fruition for the team, or was that something that was revoked?
We did not apply for any grants after that initial stakeholder meeting I think you're talking about. It was at that point in time when we started expanding the research team, and everybody you could imagine, I mean, you're talking about some of the biggest names in the world in their fields. They have a lot of stuff on their plates, and they had to clean a lot of stuff up, and they had to get around to being able to actually now provide this application to the government of Canada. So the money that has been spent mainly in the way of in-kind with analyses and stuff. I mean, Bill Shoddock has 3 dedicated research wells on his property, and he and the Elmville Foundation have come. We were up there last October to sample water from a number of different wells throughout the area. Anybody who would allow us to sample their water, we did. That water is being analyzed by the Ontario Geological Survey and by Ian Clark at University of Ottawa, and then by Bill at University of Alberta. So there's work that's gone on that would have been very expensive work. It's been done, but not through a formal application for funding.
Okay, so I'll follow on, Deputy Mayor.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
So the recommendation is to receive the presentation, but to take it to the next level, CEO Schmidt, I'm trying to see how we could flush out really the parameters or potential of getting involved or having council consider whether and how we might get involved with more specifics. Land has been suggested, in kind, potentially monetary. So we need to flesh out more the application and the project so that we can understand what it involves more, and then review it again as a council to see how we may participate. Any thoughts on that, CEO Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think from hearing the presentation tonight, not a politician, but I think it would be in the best interest of the township to have an interest in it. And what I mean by that is that, as the presenters mentioned tonight, is having some in-kind contribution. So as you're aware, we are on the path of looking for a new GM position, and that individual might be a good position or a good individual to join in the discussion with the 2 individuals and their teams to again see what kind of support the township could provide in addition to that, and I think maybe get a better handle on the project and the details of the project, and then be able to report back to council with a position as to whether or not there would be seeking a funding or actual funding, or whether or not there might be other requests that the group may need. So I think at this stage, I think we commit to that is that we'd like to be involved, and that we will definitely participate as much as we can. I'm not sure a bi-weekly participation might be too frequent for us, but again, I think being more involved in it and partnering with them that way, I think is a start. And then again, as we become more knowledgeable about the project, if there's additional needs and resources that are required, again, those could potentially be brought to council for further consideration.
I appreciate, oh, sorry, Mayor.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I appreciate very much what CAO Schmidt said, and Mayor Allen, I understand why you asked that. And the bottom line is, for us, once you have decided as a group that yes, you want to partner, or no, you don't want to partner, once you say you want to partner, then we would, if you could hook someone up with me who can ask me questions, or I can provide information to it, would answer a lot of the questions that CAO Schmidt had. It's a very simple thing. It would be a letter of intent, first of all, from the council saying we will be a partner in this. That's not a commitment for money. It's not a commitment for anything. It's just saying you want to be a partner. Nobody's trying to tie anybody's hands. And then
I think what we need to do is just find out more about the parameters of being a partner in the project. So we've touched on different aspects of the project. So I think if we refer this back to staff after receiving it for a little more rounded out information about the project, and the logistics and timing of it and probability of success of the funding, so on. You're looking for $1 million a year for 5 years. Have you had any indication from the government about the probability of being successful in that application?
No, unfortunately, the government of Canada, especially when it comes to research, academic research funding, they tell you to submit an application and off you go. And nobody is treated any differently. But we know that this project is unique. We know that it meets all of the requirements for funding through the Alliance grant scheme. And we know that the people that are applying for it have been extremely successful in their careers in receiving funding for this kind of work.
Okay. And from a political perspective, we'd be able to get our federal and provincial MPs and MPPs involved in helping push for this. So that would be helpful as well.
We would love that. I mean, that would be a great contribution, because one of the things we will have to do in this study is to say, okay, Springwater Township is a partner. We then have to work together. We work with you guys, or whoever you designate to be the on the ground people with us, to say, what are the objectives of Springwater Township? How can this research help you with your objectives, and or training more highly qualified people to deal with policy related to water as a resource? We want to show that we've made a change, or that you've decided that the results of this project are important enough that you've made changes within your township to better the township and its ability to help govern Ontario and the country.
Okay. Clerk Ainsworth, have you drafted potential wording then?
Yes, Mayor Allen. What I would recommend is putting the main motion on the floor with a mover seconder, and then with a referral to staff to further report to council outlining possible partnership options for consideration.
Okay. All right, can I have a mover and seconder for that, please? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coughlin. Any further discussions before we go to vote on this then, please? Clerk Ainsworth?
Thank you. As it is a referral, we would also need a mover and seconder for the referral portion.
Okay, separately, Councillor Moore and Councillor Ma. So we're voting first on the referral?
That would be the only vote for this portion, yes.
Okay. Any comment before we go to vote on this then? All those in favor? And any opposed? That is carried. Okay, so good progress. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for an update. Councillor Ritchie, I see you have your card up.
Yes, Mayor Allen, just through to Mike Powell and to Bill. Bill, you've been up here for enough years, you know the area and the lay of the land. Up there on the old second where the potato farms were, they drilled wells all back in the 80s, 70s for land irrigation. and they hit an underground lake. And when they tested the water, that water then, it was supposed to be the oldest and purest water ever. So I guess what I'm saying is, it'd be interesting if you could reach out to the people that own that land and test that water as well too, because the whole area is worth diving into. And apparently there is a large underground lake that provides the water to a lot of those farms up in that area there. So I just want to reach out. Maybe Bill, you already know about it, but anyways, I just want to mention that. Thank you.
So if I can just very quickly, thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
That's extremely helpful. That's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. And if you could provide us with a contact or a location, we would certainly follow up with that.
Councillor Ritchie?
Langman Farms, the Langmans, they're the very well-known, respected farmers in the area, are the ones that own the land. They're like, as I said, it's a large chunk of land. They're the ones that own it. But having said that, if you took a map and you just looked at of the area, and you started in Lake Simcoe, you got Little Lake, and you keep coming north, you've got the area where I just mentioned about where the old potato farms are. If you keep going north of the map, you're into the Waverly uplands. And if you just you go right to Georgia Bay, the whole area is a scientific masterpiece of underground water. And we are so fortunate to have that. Thank you.
Do you, Bill, do you know Ross Langman?
I certainly know the name, but no, I don't know any of the Langman family. No.
Maybe if you followed up with Councillor Ritchie, he'd make an introduction to be able to talk to.
That would be awesome. I've heard a lot about the family, and I know they're very successful farmers. So maybe I will just also add, if I may, just very, very quickly, trying to understand this area, speaking with John Cherry, Ian Clark, and of course Mike, plus our colleagues at the Ontario Geological Survey. Yes, Councillor Ritchie, that area to the east, all of those hills, all the way out to Lake Simcoe, Lake Couchiching, all of those have a tremendous relevance. And I had proposed to a previous Premier of Ontario and the Premier before that, so Dalton McGuinty and then Catherine Wynne, is that entire area should be considered as a kind of blue belt, as an area of very unique and very special water. So you're absolutely right on that.
Okay. All right then. I think we will then move on to the confirmatory bylaw. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much, and we look forward to following up with you.
Thank you very much. And please, whoever it's going to be, feel free to, my contact information is on the bottom of that last slide. Well, Renee knows how to reach me. Please don't hesitate. Anything, any question, anything you want to request, send it to me and I'll get it to you as quickly as I possibly can.
We will do that. Thank you again.
Thanks very much, everybody. Take care and stay well.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Can I have a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Moore, that bylaw 2021-057 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on May 19th, 2021, listed herein, be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And a mover and seconder for adjournment, please. Councillor Moore and Councillor Ma. The special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 6:08 p.m. to meet again in regular meeting on May 19th at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you again. See you shortly. Same link.
Yes, I was just going to mention that same link for this 6:30 meeting.
Thank you.